Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you guys for coming out tonight for our comprehensive plan update public engagement. This will be the first public engagement of the process. I'm Drew Paxton, the Director of Development Services. And so tonight we're going to have a brief presentation from our consultants with Freese and Nichols, and then we're going to go through some of these workstations around the room and to gather input from the community for the comprehensive plan update. And with that, I'll turn it over to Caitlin.
Thanks, Drew. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. We really appreciate you coming out, talking to us, making a difference in your community. So I guess someone will advance my slides for me, I assume, if I say it. Okay, thank you. So tonight, this is the beginning of the process, and so we are still in our listening mode. So we just want to hear from you guys about all the things we're going to be addressing in this plan and understand kind of the vision and the priorities of the people of Kerrville before we try to step in and present any ideas. All right, so I'm going to do just a quick presentation, about 15, 20 minutes, just to kind of give you an overview of the project, what we're doing here, where we are in our process, what to expect out of this. And then a little bit of what we heard from the community survey. And then I'm going to explain the concept of resilience because we do want to hear from the city residents about some resilience that we can be building into the comprehensive plan. That's one of our scopes of work we were specifically given from the city, is to work resilience into more of the plan. And then we're going to spend most of the time at these stations, just chatting with you guys out on the floor, getting your input. So next slide. So the city of Kerrville is of course, the primary player in this planning process. We are with Freese and Nichols. We're an engineering, design, and planning firm headquartered in Fort Worth. I am out of San Marcos. We have team members here tonight out of our Austin, San Antonio, and DFW offices, but David's joining us from DFW because he actually grew up here, so he wanted to be involved and come back to Kerrville, so he's here tonight. We also have a couple consultants. TXP is a market and economics consultant that is helping us understand the market analysis and economic development strategies that come out of our recommendations. And then CDS is a housing consultant. They did the last housing study in 2018, and they have updated it for 2024 as part of this process. Next slide. So why do we do comprehensive planning? In Texas, we cannot stop development and we cannot control growth. There are places in the United States that have growth control tools, and those are very specific tools that they use in those parts of the country. Those are illegal in Texas. So illegal is a by right state. People can do with their land what they want within reason. There's obviously zoning ordinances and things like that, but we cannot tell someone they are not allowed to develop their property and sell homes. So what can we do? We can use planning and tools like comprehensive plans to help set a vision and guide growth in a way that is going to be beneficial not just for new residents, but also brings benefits for existing residents to communities. So that is the goal of what we're trying to do here, is understand what growth could be coming and how can we shape that with the tools we do have available to try to bring some benefits to the community along with that growth. Next slide. So what is a comprehensive plan and what it is not? This is very important. So comprehensive plans are not a legally binding document. They are not an ordinance or regulation like a zoning ordinance. They are truly a tool and a vision and a guiding document. So they don't have any legal teeth to make anyone do anything. They are a vision and guiding document that the city can use, that the constituents and the residents can use to kind of hold the city accountable and say, hey, you said this is what you were gonna do, are you doing it? But there is no legal binding to this document. Thank you. This can be used as a guideline for budgeting, CIP plans, strategic plans, things like that. So it is important, but it in itself is not a legally binding document. Make it very clear. All right, next slide. So in 2018, the Kerrville 2050 plan was adopted. And so that was a ground up, brand new comprehensive plan for the city of Kerrville, looking out to the year 2050. So what we have been brought in to do is update that plan. A lot of things have changed since 2018. It is best practice to, even though this is a plan that was looking out to 2050, to update it more regularly than that. Can you imagine what 2050 is going to be like, right? And so things change. And so we want to make sure that the things that were in the 2018 plan, we're coming in, we're updating them as needed for today's priorities, for today's realities. So we will look at, so again, the housing analysis and strategic plan update has already been done. CD&S has already updated that. We've done our community analysis from a quantitative perspective. The point of tonight is to kind of get some of that qualitative information from you all, so we're not just using data. We want to hear what you guys are actually telling us and experiencing from your views as residents. And then we will review and update existing content of the plan. So you'll see that list of chapters that we will be updating. We'll look at infrastructure capacity with our engineers. And then we'll also, that integration of sustainability and resilience into all of those chapters, that was a piece that was kind of identified by the planning department as missing in that last version of the plan. And then we'll supplement all of that with an economic development update from our TXP subconsultant. Next slide. We also have two pieces of more specific, what we call small area plans. So we will be looking specifically at downtown. There was a downtown chapter in the previous plan, so we'll be updating that and adding to it. The last downtown plan looked a lot at like economic development and market analysis and things like that. So our scope is specifically coming in and looking at some of that public realm fabric. So how are we connecting places? What is the experience? What are the outdoor spaces like in downtown? So a little bit less talking about the uses in downtown and more talking about how are we connecting that fabric of downtown through the public realm. Next slide. We're also going to be looking at the Nimitz Lake area. So this is one of the catalyst areas that was identified in the 2018 plan. So this is kind of the follow-up to that, is now we're looking more deeply at it. So this area is really kind of open for discussion right now. We want to hear how you guys as residents would like to see this area develop. What else do you think could make this area more interesting for you guys to utilize? How could it help support the city and its goals and maybe just the vision you guys have for it? So those are our two places that we're specifically looking into more. Next slide. So we started this back in June. We've been doing, like I said, a lot of kind of our quantitative analysis, talking to staff, talking to our CPAC, which is our Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, and that is the Planning and Zoning Commission is serving as that CPAC. We launched the community website and survey back in July. The survey is closed, but the website will be open throughout the whole process as kind of the place for all of the information. There's also a mapping exercise on there that will be open through the spring, and we'll kind of close that down as we get into finalization, but we'll keep that open throughout the majority of the process. So we will be looking at going for finalization and approval of the plan next June, so in the early summer of 2025. Next slide. Some of the things we just wanted to point out that we've seen so far. So again, CDS has already updated the housing study. From their data, they're seeing about a 2,000 to 2,500 demand for additional units in the city. To note, there are about 800 to 900 units, single-family lots already in certain stages of development in the city right now, so that should satisfy demand for 2 to 3 years. You can see some of the housing burden numbers. It's what we've been talking about a lot, even just so far in the process, is this idea of housing affordability. You can see this chart on the bottom, maybe why you're having housing affordability issues, because the cost of housing here in the city has just skyrocketed even over the last 10-ish years. But what's really interesting to us is that 36% of homeowners are considered housing cost burden, which means they're spending more than 30% of their household income on housing. That number goes up to 48 for renters, and then 25% of renters are extremely housing cost burden, meaning they're spending well over that 30% of their income on housing. So this is just kind of painting a picture for us, right? What we do with that information is our next step. Next slide, please. I'm also looking at population projections. So these are put out by the Texas Water Development Board. They are the jurisdiction that does population projections for the state of Texas. You can see here Kerrville is kind of that lighter blue line in the middle. So there's been expected to be a spike kind of in this decade, and then leveling off after that. You can see Bernie and Dripping Springs, they are really just going gangbusters. But this is just kind of helping us understand where the future of Kerrville might end up. Next slide. So with that, the figure on the left, this is historic populations. The CAGR change, that stands for compound annual growth rate. So that is telling you what is the average growth rate over those decades, year over year. On the left, we're taking the Texas Water Development Board 2020 population numbers, and we're expanding that. We're looking at a 1.5%, a 2%, and a 2.5% growth rates. I like to always preface with population projections are more of an art than they are a science. There is a lot of variables in this. There's a lot of things that could happen that we cannot predict. However, what we like to understand is what are the potential and plausible futures for Kerrville. Again, we're not stopping growth. And so what kind of growth should we be expecting and planning for? And so we're looking at in the year 2050, which is the lifespan of this plan, we're looking at somewhere between 38 and 51,000 people potentially in the city of Kerrville. So what are we going to do with that? That's the question we have in front of us. Next slide, thank you. So the community feedback, we have had 2 CPAC meetings, one of which was today. We also had a DAC meeting, which is our Downtown Advisory Committee. So we do have a separate advisory committee thinking about specifically downtown. We had our online community survey open for 6 weeks with 427 responses. And then our online interactive map that so far we have 45 responses, but we will be keeping that open for a long time. So this is just kind of a summary of the things we heard out of the survey. The survey response document is a very, very long document. We do have it available. We have some of the primary questions on a board over here. We do have the full document available tonight as well if anyone wants to dig into hundreds of pages of survey responses, but we do have it. So these are just some of the themes that we heard come out of that survey. All right, next slide, please. One thing we have done at this point is we have updated the vision statement based on some of the survey responses and conversations we've had so far from the 2018 plan. A couple specific things that we did in the previous vision statement from 2018, there were some very specific, in the values piece, there were some specific things about growth and things like that. And what we were seeing in our survey is that growth wasn't necessarily a value of the people of Kerrville. It was something that's happening in Kerrville. And so we kind of flipped the language of this a little bit to say, Kerrville is going to approach growth in the way that it aligns with these values. So that's kind of how we've restructured the vision statement a little bit. And we do have a board on that with the old vision statement, the new vision statement. Happy to get any thoughts or feedback that anyone has on that. One thing I will say, we are consultants. We're not from Kerrville with the exception of David. He actually is from Kerrville. But this is your plan. We're kind of here as facilitators of the process and to write a document for you, but what is in that document really comes from you guys. So we want this to be a plan for Kerrville, for the people of Kerrville, for the city of Kerrville. So we want you guys to really feel ownership over this. So we don't take anything personally. So if you see anything in here that's like, that's not really Kerrville, or that doesn't sound like what I think I'm experiencing in the city, we want to hear those kind of things. Next slide. So just this last piece here, I want to talk a little bit about resilience because this is a specific scope item we were asked to look at and kind of infuse into all of the things from the 2018 plan. So the idea of resilience, this is a FEMA hazard, this is a FEMA definition of resilience. It's the ability to prepare for threats and hazards, adapt to changing conditions, and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. We had a really good conversation about hazards and impacts at our CPAC meeting this afternoon, so that was great. We got some initial feedback there. Next slide. So what we're really talking about is two things. We're talking about shocks, and those are the things you might think about normally that like FEMA would respond to. So a natural disaster, a great big weather event that has a bunch of impacts on the community, an ice storm, for example. But we also, in resilience planning, we think about stressors as well, which are things that are kind of happening in the community. They're slowly growing, slowly getting worse, and at some point, they reach a tipping point where they start having wider impacts on the community. They're also lessening the ability of community members to be able to respond to those shocks when they do happen. So an ice storm on top of chronic health conditions, for example, is the example of a stressor kind of underlaying a shock. So this, when we talk about resilience, we're talking about all of these things. It's not just necessarily emergency management and response. It's the daily year-round things that we're doing to try to support the community so that they can be stronger in the face of a shock happening. Next slide. So all of these different systems are important and play a role in resilience. Next slide. But most important is the community, and that's often the piece that's left out of conversations like at the FEMA level, and so that's what we as planners try to come in here and talk about housing condition and those kinds of things that can help also respond to disasters, just not in a traditional disaster response and emergency response way. So you'll see some boards about resilience over here. Caroline can help you with those if you have questions, but I did want to just kind of set that stage of like what we're even talking about when we talk about resilience. Next slide. All right, so now to the fun stuff. So we have a lot of boards here today, so I'm going to give you a little lay of the land and then kind of set you free to chat with all of us. I'm going to be floating around the room, so feel free to grab me if you would like to chat. Basically, what we've got, so we have the specific stations. We have Nimitz Lake Station up there with David. Lahari will be over here at our downtown station, so if you'd like to talk specifically about those two small area plans. And then up here in the front, we have more of the general information, so some of the outcomes of the survey. Again, we have the entire survey if you would like to see it. Vision statement. This future land use map, that's the existing one from the 2018 plan, so we just have it here to kind of speak to and look at and talk about, are there things that should change? Conversations about trade-offs in land use and what does responsible growth mean for Kerrville. And then over here we have some specific topics about transportation. So Chris is your transportation guy. And then some of those conversations about resilience and shocks and stressors, and then specifically infrastructure and public facilities as well. So with that, feel free to get up and start participating in our activities, chatting with us, grab some more food. This is just casual in and out the rest of the evening tonight. So thank you so much.